Is this, do I need to turn something on? No? Working. Hi, so I'm Christel Vesters. I'm an art critic and a curator, and I want to thank Marie-José for the invitation, and I want to especially thank Nina Volkersma and Jesper for making such a beautiful exhibition. I will ask you to bear with me with the paperwork. I didn't have much time to prepare, but so I will be shuffling my papers around a bit. Before I introduce the two guests, I would like to briefly outline the setup of this evening. Tonight we will talk about Jesper Just's artist practice and his exhibition here at West, and explore the stories behind the works. We will move from the field of visual art to the domain of architecture and the world of cinema. We will move from the outside to the inside, from urban spaces to gallery spaces and back again. Sometimes the relation between these different areas is straightforward and easy to define. Sometimes the connection is more obscure and abstract. Sometimes we will circle around a topic, never really getting to a point, or jump from one topic to another. Or the transition, or rather transformation, will be more fluid, more like a continuous movement. But I think this mode of exploring things is exactly what suits Jesper Just's work. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the artist behind the exhibition inside the Huis Hugotan and the installation that we are seeing here in the back. Jesper was born in Denmark and lives and works in Copenhagen and New York. He graduated from the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen and has since exhibited all around the world. He works predominantly with film and video, but has also worked with performance and dance. Besides New York, Venice and Madrid, his work has been shown in Witte de Wit in Rotterdam and in the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. And at the end of the year, the Eiffel Museum in Amsterdam will present a large solo exhibition of his work. In the other chair, it's Rutger Wolfson. We go back a while, yes. 20 years, which makes you, what, 48 and me 37, something?
I'm 47.
Rutger was actually the first curator I met who dressed like a skateboarder, and that was in 1996. At that time, Rutger was part of the curatorial team at Witte de Wit Art Center in Rotterdam, and in 2000 he became the director of the Art Center in the Vleeshal in Middelburg, where he made his mark with a program of groundbreaking cross-disciplinary exhibitions, amongst others the acclaimed exhibition Super Studio Life Without Objects in 2004. In 2007, Rutger returned to Rotterdam to become the director of the International Film Festival Rotterdam, a position that he held until 2015. So my first question is actually for Rutger, which now I have to swap my cards and look for the right one. If we look at Jesper's work, Rutger, and in terms of their high quality production, his films can compete with mainstream cinema, but differ from Hollywood productions. Like his films don't deliver a narrative with a beginning, a middle and an end. However, there seems to be an overall story that unfolds within and between the works. Would you say, because you saw the exhibition beforehand, can you tell us, is there a storyline you picked up in particular?
Well, I think what's super interesting about the exhibition, there are many interesting things, but one of the super interesting things is that he turned it into a site-specific cinema, which is an idea I really like, but it doesn't really exist in mainstream cinema. Cinema is always obsessed with this screen, which is pretty generic. You can screen a film anywhere in any festival, in any cinema. But I think the idea of making a projection more site-specific and building the experience around the screen is potentially very powerful, and this is very clear also in this exhibition. So that's one of the reasons why I like this exhibition a lot, because if you talk to filmmakers, they have a real trouble escaping this kader, this screen. And it's usually artists who find smart ways to deal with that and make it more exciting. Also in terms of maybe very cinematic terms like decoupage and editing, the exhibition is very smart. There's especially the...
Can you give us an example?
Well, the most striking example is the multiple screen one in the States. where the girl in the tutu, Kim Gordon, is playing with the fence. You really have to wander around a little bit to catch the action, so you become kind of an editor yourself while seeing the exhibition. And again, that's something very powerful that happens when you start to talk about or think about more site-specific cinema.
Is he right?
Of course. Yeah, it's something I've thought a lot about in how to, because in cinema you don't have the physicality of when you experience a movie. You don't use your body, so you are kind of in a way paralyzed, and it's more like an escapism. Where I think when you're forced to move around, it also somehow relates more to the spectator. And my hope is that it then points back somehow as you are moving, and it's something I've been working with. I think the last 10 years, trying to expand. Of course, a lot of artists work with this, but I think it's more necessary now to do it when everything is on screen and your own private screen. Everyone has their own little screen to force people in a way to experience in this. That's what you can use the exhibition space to. You also go and you also watch in a different way when you go into an exhibition space. I think that you're more alert. You look more for signs. If you sit and watch a movie in a cinema, I mean, of course, there are a lot of art house films where you also have to be awake. But I think that you automatically try to look for signs when you are going into an art institution.
So if the kind of the playing around with cinematographic conventions, breaking up in multiple screens and making a spatial montage, that's basically more or less what you're pointing at. But the movies are not devoid of story. There are protagonists. For me, it was very clear that architecture plays an important role in your work.
Yeah, but also the fact here, also playing on the title, is not only related to monument. It's also a continuous monument. It's not only related to architecture. It's also the fact that the films are never ending. They are all loops, and I think that's a way that I've been working the last few years, because it's always been problematic for me when you go into an exhibition and there's a movie and you start in the middle and you watch maybe 10 minutes and then you leave, or you have to see it to the end and then you have to see the beginning again. So this was a way to kind of get around that. So when you walk from one film, you decide yourself, but you can, because every film is just like an open moment. It's not really a narrative. Is maybe a micro narrative, and then once you walk to the next setting or scene, something else is at play, and then I think the brain will try to make a connection even if there isn't one, and that I think is interesting to play with.
And the reason why that works so well, I think, is because in some of the films, you see someone sort of like discovering a space or exploring a space, and that's the same thing you're doing as a visitor. So there's a connection between you as a visitor and the protagonists on the screen, which works really well, I think.
So this poetics of space and this mode of wandering, which an installation allows you, do you think it's a limitation of mainstream cinema, that they can only work within the frame of one screen in terms of storytelling?
Yes,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
of course. But it's really interesting to try to escape that, and that's what's going on here. And I think the other sort of like why I think it's so well executed is that there's also this element of architecture, which is both present in the installation itself. You recognize, the building blocks outside and inside of the exhibition, and you see people exploring architecture in the film itself. So there's a clear. It's very clear as a visitor. I mean, it's not obvious. You make a discovery, you make a journey, like watching a film from beginning to end, like a classic film is a discovery or a journey. But also, exploring the exhibition is also a journey. So I think it's very. I would start to use this as a textbook example of how you can really smartly think as an artist about integrating cinema in architecture and in space, and including the visitor there.
Let's talk about the most in-your-face architectural element of this exhibition, which is the space we see behind, which we cannot really call a space, can we? How would you describe? It's an installation. It's open. It's closed. It continues inside.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a definition for what it is, but it's a sculptural intervention, I guess, an architectural intervention in an already existing part of the city. And for me, it was it came out of the place for one thing, and then it's also I wanted the show exhibition to start as you approach and you see this, and then you already see the exhibition. You might not be going to the exhibition, and you might think that it's.
How is this site specific?
Well, first of all the seashells were brought here. I mean, not the ones that were already on the Lange Vorhout, but the piles were added. And then also the idea of these bricks. It's not concrete. It's actually made of. It's this Swedish invention. It's made of from the beach, and so it's just sand, shells, water, and air. So it is in a way the same material. That's also what they're more white than regular concrete blocks. So in that way, it came out of the place also.
But you call it a ruin. I thought it was kind of a ruin.
Yeah, I think okay. So the idea, well, there's lots to talk about, of course. But I've been interested in this in between a ruin and a building that is being erected, and I think it's something, or it is something that Robert Smithson talked a lot about. This in between where you couldn't place it. It was something being built or something being taken down, and I was interested in this because that's also how I work with the film and the character and the relations. Now there are only single characters in these films, but otherwise, if there are multi characters in the films, usually their relation is also undefined, and I like that where you can't really place it because that's where people usually get insecure, and mainstream cinema is especially always makes it very clear what's the relation, what's the sexuality, because you have to define it because no one can leave the place without knowing what was going on, and I like to be right there, and the same with this, and of course that will also make some people frustrated because it's not necessarily clear, and it's not that I'm smarter than anyone else. I just like when I don't know myself. Also, when I have this doubt, what is it? I think that's when it's interesting for me. But
this kind of this double meaning and this kind of ambiguity, which is for me quite evident in the films, less clearer in the installation in the back, and there was a lot of positive reviews, but there were also some people who complained about the sculpture, and they said it disrupts our view from that side of the Lange Voorhout to the other side, which is, I think, one of the most typical things architecture can do. It disrupts views and it places walls, and it's not only construction, but it also constructs the way we walk and move around in public space. So what do you think about that, this being a big disruptive? And I can see how your work is also maybe a bit disruptive in the sense that it breaks with conventions, cinematographic conventions. But what do you think about the term disruptive?
Well, it wasn't my goal to do that, but maybe to slow down the path a little bit, so that because I think that's what art can do. I mean, we could easily have placed a nice sculpture and then you know it's a sculpture, but here it slows down and it forces people to stop, and I don't think it necessarily is bad if someone also, think it's bad art, or it's okay.
It's really ugly.
It is, but
some people said.
But I think the whole reason why we have art is to point at things, and I'm sure, and I've seen a lot of people stop and really wondering what this is, and maybe if it's also permanent, but it's not. So then they're happy again.
I'm kind of pigeonholing you as the cinema expert here. Sorry about that, but it's because I'm not. This idea of disrupting, of slowing down, of making people look at the world differently or at their environment differently, is that something cinema can do too? Or is that overreaching?
No, of course. I mean, but that's such a. I mean, if
Broad.
you use cinema in a very general term, it's like art can disrupt, or it can be anything. Cinema can be most things nowadays. I think you have to be more precise about,
What kind of cinema? I
Yeah,
mean.
because there's so much around. Cinema is becoming almost like a classical art form, a classical genre, because it's changing into so many things at the moment. But yeah, clearly there's a lot going on, and there are also, of course, filmmakers who succeed in being very disruptive when looking at a single screen. You don't need to make an installation for that. I'm not
So
sure if I
maybe
answered the
that
question.
was a bit of an open door question, or a bit too naive a question. And but I was quite of wanting to go to the next topic, which is the discussion around monuments. And film can erect a monument for stories that haven't been told often enough, or people that have been obscured by history. We all know the stories around the statues and the monuments that are asked to be taken down because they represent a part of history that some don't really perceive as heritage but rather as hate. And when I arrived here, I talked with the people from West about this monument, and as I said, there were different approaches to it. So I'm trying to see what is the value of a work like this as a monument in public space today, which
I
is
think-
again a very broad question.
Well, for
but
me, this one of the aspects or one of the themes in this work is modernism, or a critique on modernism, and I guess you can call this almost like a monument with the subject of critiquing modernism. The elements are very modernist, standardized elements. And of course, the architecture in your films is very modernistic architecture, and there's this whole movement now, I guess, of people becoming very critical of modernism, as Super Studio was critical of modernism. And I think this is more a question for you, I guess. Is this a critique of modernism also on your part?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has several. There's several reasons why I've did it. I think also in a way that it's a way to amplify or somehow resonance what is going on in the films and what is going outside. So you experience it. It's also something that guides you through the thing, but at the same time, the structures that are in the films are very. They all somehow relates to power, and I think also when you see this at first, it feels misplaced or dropped down in this area, which is not a monuments area. It's I don't know when this was probably built 400 or 500 years ago. These different places, and it was also the street is made for the king also, right? To travel and have his.
it's a seat of power.
Yeah. So of course, playing with that and then having these female characters, kind of reclaiming some kind of space or power or their own image in these structures. But using the actual structures in the space to underline that, I think, what is going on in the films, because it is connected.
There's two things that I noticed. We spoke a bit before 8 o'clock, and you asked me about the women in the film, basically, you didn't say it like that, but you pointed me in that direction. And the women that we see in the film are not your mainstream girls next door. They are, I won't call them misfits, but they are outstanding characters. They stand out from the regular people. Is that a reason why you choose these particular women?
Yeah, I think that's it related to just cinema in general, that it's very rare that you have a character, also female, in the center of a story, especially if she's not in her 20s and very pretty. Then otherwise, then you get different kind of roles, sidekick or grandma or whatever. So I'm interested in having characters that where it's not about the fact that they are not that guy or that girl in their 20s, but it's about something else. Because usually when you have then a character like someone who's not this usual mainstream center, it's about the fact that they are old, or they are minority, or they are, and then it's a tragedy, and it's all about how terribly hard it is to be this kind of character. So, I mean, that just feels natural to pick different kind of people.
But do they play a character in your films? I thought they were rather themselves. They weren't really acting.
Yeah, but I mean, it is. I mean, I directed. It's not like they just show up and do what they want. I mean, I've directed them to what they do. So,
Okay.
And I think once you put, I mean, you can't talk about authenticity. I mean, once there's a camera, I mean, it's
You
fiction.
act, yeah.
You will definitely act differently than.
I want to jump back to Super Studio. Rutger, you made an exhibition, Life Without Objects, in the Vleeshal together with Zeeuws Museum. What was it that sparked your interest in their practice? Do you remember?
To be honest, I wasn't the curator of the exhibition, it was someone else, but it was in the space. I was the director. I was always a huge fan of their work. I guess, like many people, their work more from images, which are incredibly powerful. Everybody talks about how influential Super Studio is. I think it's more on the level of imagery than on sort of like their intellectual.
Maybe I should introduce. Do we know Super Studio? I'm just opening my Wikipedia in the back of my mind. It's an architectural collective from the 1960s and 70s, Italy, with quite a subversive take on modernism. They produced series of drawings, speculative architectural drawings, in which they superimposed meta-structures on existing cityscapes. And I think the image that was used for this event on Facebook is one of their images.
Maybe I can elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, please.
They were, as you mentioned, very radical group. They rejected architecture of the time, the dominant architecture of the time, which was modernism. It was the 60s, of course, so they felt it was too commercial. They also rejected all kinds of design because it wasn't functional anymore. It was very much turned into like a commercial kind of practice. So they wanted to kind of abolish all architecture and all design, really go back to zero. And they were very critical of modernism. So they sort of like said, well, modernism pretended to have all the solutions for all the problems in the world. The world is sick. Modernism is going to cure the world, but that didn't happen. In their view, they were very critical. They were saying it's taking over the world, this kind of ideology, and it's pushing out all human skill. And they to make that their point visible, they made these visuals where you see existing cities that are almost being taken over by some kind of alien mothership, which is like the super modernist structure. And they were first trying to show sort of like the extreme possible end result of modernism, and I think that's how most people first see their work. Think, wow, this is very powerful. If you actually look at their thinking, it's pretty erratic. If you read what they write, it's hard to read because they have their own vocabulary and it's not very sensical. It's all over the place. but they had a huge impact, and also because their thinking was so large scale. So they weren't proposing anything small; they were proposing huge gestures. Also, visually, they made this. This is you can see
Just as
this.
ambitious as modernism was.
Yes, yes, and I think that's they were perhaps the first architects or artists who were countering modernism with the same kind of ambitious scale.
Skills, yeah.
Yeah.
But never intended to be built, right?
No.
So
It was more. It's more like
sketches,
yes.
collage.
So yeah, and I can see the relationship between. Well, maybe I should ask you what your first interest, why you were interested in them.
Well, it was definitely visually first, because I also thought that the images were very powerful, and then and then slowly I just I've worked with these structures before in at the Venice Biennial in 2013, where it was around the Danish Pavilion and inside, a little bit like here, but still different. At that time, it wasn't really a reference, but then. I think it was also all these trees on this long row, and I had also other ideas of putting like walls between but that would have been even more obstructive, but disruptive. And then because the films in the exhibition are not made at the same time, they're made different times. Some of them are part of a performance or part of another installation with 7 other films, but I just handpicked those films that somehow related to this idea of these structures that also were in a way continuous, like the idea of the border, and also the World Trade Center, which when you stand and look at it, it's kind of like it never ends. It has this kind of so they had all these. Kind of overlapping ideas, and and then of course the whole idea of utopia, and one of the films is filmed in a communist commune in California. They're all structures from the U.S. And there's this ruin from a communist commune out in California, which was built a little more than 100 years ago. It was about 1,000 people living out there, and they were self-sufficient with everything. They even have their own film studio and aviation, and which didn't go so well. But it was also a female architect who had big plans on how to design this when they wanted to expand. So they wanted to create a communal kitchen in the center with tunnels, underground tunnels going to every house, and then having all the houses kitchenless, so to liberating the women, and so the food would just be brought into the houses from the communal kitchen. And I was very intrigued by that, especially also because it's in the US. I thought it was interesting, and there's a lot of anecdotes related to this guy, Joe Perryman, who was almost elected mayor in LA. But then he lost by a few hundred votes because he was representing some terrorists who tried to bomb LA Times, and then the LA Times really, of course, were hitting on him, so he lost his campaign, but he was very close to winning. So he got very disappointed and moved into the desert and built this commune. Then they lost the right to water after 4 years because the surrounding farms were starting to get annoyed by all these people living out there, and so I tried to make a monument around that that was never ending. Also this loop, and then speeding up the decay of a place by placing these Hollywood film effect rain bars. So it kind of is water destroying the piece, but then there's this woman, almost Sisyphusian, putting back the bricks as they fall off the ruin.
It's also nice because water played such water played such an important part in the downfall of this commune, and now you're
that was the
back
irony,
water.
kind of ironic. Yeah.
That's the work Lana, which is in the first room on the right. You're talking about, huh? So Super Studio's interest in utopia, which was at the same time kind of dismantling the modernist utopian vision, but also proposing something new, no? And I think this work, Lana, was quite dystopian. It was almost, we have this saying in Dutch, bringing water to the sea, which of course is a bit contradiction with in a desert, but it's almost as if you are fighting against a continuous movement, which is almost irreversible.
But it's also a play. I think it's it's because it's the remains of a utopian idea. It's in a way a place that is no more, but it's also a place that never was. So it's this weird double thing that you all kind of almost experience sideways. I don't know how to put it, but I think it has a double effect.
It's almost like it's a question. I don't know how to phrase it like a question, but it's also like you look at architecture in the same way as you look at utopias or ideologies. There's these super ambitious megalomaniac architecture or super ambitious megalomaniac ideologies, and then there's these individual characters sort of like trying to find their way into that or trying to find out how to relate to that.
Yeah, so there's also the World Trade Center, which now I live in New York and I experienced it being built and suddenly I get sunlight much earlier because it reflects into my window. So it's weird that there now is a physical structure representing something that is no more, but it's a different structure, but it's still in a way a monument of something else. And so it has this weird phantom limb feeling that there's one and it's just standing there, and it's such a weird place around it. And then rather than having these characters being, I'm not criticizing these structures. It's more trying to insist in finding the poetry in them somehow, or using them as mediators between the characters to communicate or connect somehow. That's something I worked with a lot.
Sorry.
I've noticed you talk about structures rather than architecture. Is that a conscious? Is that a conscious decision?
Not sure if you know. I don't know. Yeah. Well, when I do something like this, I would not call it a structure. I'd call it an architectural intervention. So I don't know if I.
Okay, then I just picked up because I was thinking if you call it structures, then you also refer to their ideological status. They are more than just concrete on concrete. They really structure. They have an active role. Yeah, they act.
Well, I use them in that sense when there's the girl with the rock making a little rhythm tapping on the facade of the World Trade Center. She's also playing. She has a handicap, so it's very hard for her to get the rock out of her pocket and get it down again. But the idea was also her, in a way, playing with her own image or reclaiming her own image. And I also in a way, refers to the whole idea of this mirror therapy that you use. If you're missing a limb, you can trick the brain to so you ease the phantom pain in the missing hand by seeing two hands, by hiding the stump, but then just seeing two hands, one in the reflection and the other for real, and in that way ease the pain. And I wanted her to, in a way, play with that and use the building for her own means and kind of take her own image back, in a way, using this structure for that. It could be any building, in a way, with a glass facade.
Hold your question. I want to open up to the audience. Is there anyone who has seen the exhibition and has a question for Jesper, or maybe someone has a question for Rutger? Wait, there's a roving mic, which.
Yes.
Yes, I have a question about the Gothic space that is created by the overhanging trees here and the architectural space of late modernism that you have created here. What is the relationship between this Gothic space and the late modern space?
Well, I think it's the same as on the inside and the outside. The contrast is clearly very big with these structures that someone might not find very decorative. But at the same time, I think it also makes at least me notice much more the space around and also inside. I see more the details around. So in a way, it also points back. Might be that you can only focus on this obstruction, but I think it also, in a way, helps to see what is around. I don't have like a direct link between the two, but I remember when it's a little bit of an anecdote, but I worked with the structures in the Venice Biennial, and there's the Danish pavilion is neoclassical and also modernist. There are these two highlights of Danish architecture history, and they're kind of put together, and it feels like a clash or an architectural joke in a way. I'm not making a joke here, but there you have it, and there we built the wall all around it, and at the opening, the cultural minister, she came, and the first thing she said was just, "I'm very provoked by this," and I was very nervous because that was not it's not my intention. Maybe thought-provoking, but not. I just don't see any reason to just make a provocation. But then she and a lot of the other audience, you find the walls at first maybe very brutal and they're kind of cutting off for the experience or the view. But after a while, you also find out they become your friend and your guide, and they will lead you through this other space. At the same time, might feel a little bit of displacement, but I think it what at first feels hostile, it later becomes your friend, and the cultural minister was also the day after very happy and just wanted a hug. So I think if you give it time, I think it will give something back. Maybe.
Are there other questions at the moment? Yeah.
Actually, first of all, I would like to compliment you because it's the first time in the show that I actually watched all the videos and even came back or went back and forth between some. What struck me so much, and I'm just an amateur, I'm not in arts, is that the sounds of the different videos so played together so well. Could you imagine that beforehand?
That was the starting when we was sitting in the empty space and talking about what to do. I think because first we thought, okay, how are we gonna have all these videos with different sounds and play and make them all separate and you don't hear the noise from the others? And that was already kind of impossible unless you make a lot of maybe even more construction. And you would lose the space, I think, also. So then I think the idea as a starting point, I've worked with sound bleeding before on purpose, so it's not that it was all new, but I thought that maybe taking all the sounds of all these structures, it's not music per se, but it is also used in a way as a sculptural element, the sound, as much as just sound. So it's never the same because they're not in sync. So they will always be in a different. because some films are shorter than others, so it will never sound the same. There's no way I can imagine exactly, but I think we just tried in the space on the laptop. We just played 3 of the videos in QuickTime, and just to see how does this work, and then it just had some kind of, especially the bass and the fence. There was something there that kind of felt right, and then we just took it and ran with it. So it came out of sitting here trying to figure out what to do. Yeah.
You also had a question. I kind of
several.
interrupted it.
I forgot most of them already. No, but coming back to, I guess I wanted to nerd out on cinema references and stuff. But there's another. What I like about the way you use the structure in the space is it almost is like a film set, and some places you can see it's fake. It's a whole deliberately. You can see that behind it's just an empty structure, and I like this idea that I thought about doing a. When you think about deconstructing a film into a space, making a film spatial, the set is obviously a strong element. If you can use elements of the set in the film, then also use it in the architecture of the exhibition is a strong idea. And because these blocks are not literally in the films, but they are so in the same realm of aesthetics of architecture and modernism, that you automatically almost sort of like sense that you're walking through a film set watching films. I thought it was a beautiful point. But to nerd back on films, I mean, did you have specific films or filmmakers that were inspirational for you when you were making these films? Or a certain kind of type of filmmaking?
I mean, film in general, and maybe I can. I don't know if I can point to a specific that this is related exactly to a film. I mean, sometimes I do that, having very clear references, but. And it can be that I just forgot, but yes. Because I do research. Oh, there's a film program downstairs, but it's more what have been inspirational in general. So there are some films, but actually they're more related to other older or newer projects.
Yeah. Because I thought especially the work with the girl playing the bass in this it's not literally a scene from a film, or in that sense a very clear reference, but there's, I guess, especially in a lot of Asian contemporary cinema, a lot of themes of like being alienated in the big anonymous city kind of feel, and I thought that maybe there was might be a connection there between those kind of films and that one.
I mean, I've seen a lot of Asian films. It's not that if there's a specific reference, don't know. I think, but I can say one thing. I was doing a documentary once, only once, and with in Thailand, and there I think I experienced a very different tempo and a way of setting a scene, having the character going from go through the image from one side all the way through to the other.
Art house cliché,
and also but also in relations to city and architecture and those, because I don't think I had that kind of slow pace before, and a lot of that pace I think is maybe here because it's very slow. I mean, extreme. That zoom on the building is so maybe indirectly.
Yes. Part of your subconscious.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure you can find something that's the same. I don't know.
I kind of, when I was preparing for this this talk, I kept saying continuous movements rather than continuous monuments, which to me makes complete sense as a title. So I think we should rename the whole show "Continuous Movements." But well, we can talk about it. But I want to go back to what you said in the beginning about the installation, film installation, which allows the viewer to kind of cut and paste and make their own montages. And even this as an open structure and a closed structure reminds me of that kind of montage where the viewer is invited to fill in the gaps, basically. But I see a bit of a contradiction with the way you set up the exhibition, because it's quite one-directional. There's only one route that you can take. Well, two, yeah, and back again, yeah. But that doesn't allow the individual works to connect with each other. Well, the sound, which was a very clear remark, the sound refers back and forth, but you are forced to go from one work to the other, and then you can move back. Was that a conscious decision, or was that because the space is?
It's definitely depicted by the size of the rooms and the space, how it's built. It's rather. I did an installation in Palais de Tokyo in a very, very large basement in Paris, and there it was 8 films, and you could hear them all at the same time. It was different films, but there you walked more clearly, and when you were closer here, you could hear the others in the distance, but then you were focusing on this, and so I just think they would have to be turned up really loud in order for you to hear them all, and I don't know if that would be mean to the people working there.
I think it's a good question, but I had more or less the same question, inspired by your question earlier. But I think it's more about loops. Everything is a loop. Nina also points it out in her essay. It's like, is that something deliberate or by chance? Because you can say it's by chance because you have to show film work in a gallery, so it has to be a continuous play, so it becomes a loop. But to me, it feels like you like loops a lot.
Yeah, I mean, usually because all these films are actually part of, except the Jano one, but the others are all part of larger installations or performances, and I do just think that it's something that I've found that when you have multiple screens, if the films are not the same length, it's gonna be a mess if they have a beginning and an end, and I mean then you end here and this is 6 minutes long, and then you go in and you start in the middle of something else, and I myself would be irritated if so it's you could say it's to make it smooth. You can walk through pretty fast and get the essence maybe of the work, and if you stay you will get more, but I think.
But is it also on a more like metaphorical level, like the continuous? That there's like the continuous monuments, like it's a continuous battle or struggle between power and individuals, or it's.
Well, in this case, the characters keep on doing it and just realizing, accepting that if you go back, like rolling this rock up the mountain, but and it keeps falling down. So in that sense, you can say it's accepting that.
And there are
pointing at it.
There are a couple of blind walls where you walk into, like you at one point you literally have to go. You can't go straight on. You have to, find your way around it, which is not. It's not a fluid loop. It's a loop with obstacles. Yeah, which I thought was quite telling.
I think it's also in a way to try to. I don't know if it works because but I'm trying to also to a little bit playing on as a spectator that you lose a little bit of orientation and might be mean, but I like that feeling when you kind of not really sure where you are when you come out.
Would you rather have closed the exit, like really entrapment?
Which exit?
Well, no. Now you can exit at two sides. Anyway, that was a funny. Not really. Forget about it. I didn't bring a watch, so I have no idea how we're doing on time. Okay means. Okay. Do you have a question for Rutger?
I have a question for you. Is that okay?
That's better.
No, because you mentioned that you did performances a couple of times. I don't know of them, but I'm very curious. After having seen this, can you maybe talk about one to sort of like get a sense of how you incorporate?
Okay, yeah. So I just did one at the Royal Danish Ballet with where I did the choreography, the set design, and the films that was also part of it, and
Choreography for the
dancers,
dance group.
the ballet dancers. And
you made a choreography.
yeah, I was learning along how to talk to a dancer, classical trained dancer. That's not easy. So. No, well, eventually, but
you did it by example, or no?
No, so I think it took 2 weeks before we found a way of communicating. Just because maybe my approach is I talk about, I don't know, references and this and that, and this means this, and they just want to move. They just want to move and have someone stand like this. And I'm not that person. At least I wasn't. Maybe now. But so the concept was it was not on a stage. It was again. So there's some similarities. The audience were to meet outside the freight elevator of the Royal Theatre, which is an old theater, and then they were led into a freight elevator. The freight elevator taken up, and it was the amount of audience were only the amount that would fit in that elevator, which was 70 people, I think. So you would go on a journey together with all these people, and it would go up, and then you would be led into a big grey room where there was nothing, and you just stand there, and you would hear this kind of weird sound from the floor and coming out of the floor panels. Then this piano would start to play, and slowly you see, okay, some of us are making weird movements and kind of coming out, not like a flash mob in a mall, but slowly they were starting to dance, but they were still having lots of, they wear this kind of Michelin clothes when they're cold, because they need to keep their muscles warm. Throughout the performance, they start to take off these things. So they were
in the audience, and the audience didn't
know.
know.
They came up with the
audience didn't know they were dancers.
No, I mean it wasn't said and wasn't pointed out. But then after 10 minutes, and they started to repeat some routines. They constantly changed partner. It was 3 men and 3 women, and then they kind of constantly changed pairs and setups, and sometimes it was 3 men making lady lifts or whatever you call it. So they were kind of changing the conventions of how you do the pas de deux or whatever. So we were playing with that. But then after 7 or 8 minutes, they would start repeating all those movements again, and so that live dance was also a repetition. But then after 12 minutes or something, these guys come through the door, and they're speaking with each other in an Eastern European language, Polish, and they're just talking, and they come with these drawings, and then they start looking at the floor, and they start taking the floor apart. So it's cut up it turns out it's cut up in 200 pieces, and they start stacking it. But the dancers continue the loop that they were already doing, but now they have to adapt, so they also have to be practical. So it was in a way pointing at the practical body and the aesthetic body, and then also the worker's body. So it was these paradigms of different bodies overlapping, and the audience body, because there was no seating. You were standing there, so suddenly they would start stacking these gray floor panels, which were this high, so you would have this topography of a dance floor. Eventually the audience were all fragments in the space, standing, looking as much as on each other as they looked at the dancers. And then eventually it would become seatings, and a lot of other things would happen. There would be films related to, there'd be a self-playing piano under one of the floor panels, while there was a film where the dancers on the film would getting these electrical impulses in relation to the music being played in the floor. So it was all these. It was in a way analog virtual reality. There were all these things in the space, kind of making things happen on the films and the other way around. So, but anyway, that was. If you have.
Sounds like you're kind of working on larger scale projects at the moment, no? Does that mean there's a feature film ahead of us?
Yeah, well, that's just on the side. It was never an ambition for me to make a feature film. I think.
Are you making a feature film or not?
I'm working on I did one treatment and I'm working on another one, and so it's just it's a plan. But as it was never my ambition, I'm working on it on the side because I have all these other things.
But is it more like a classical film, or is it?
There'll be some surprises, but it would be for cinema. I mean, I will follow the
rules and conventions.
Yeah, you have to sit down.
Yeah.
From the beginning to the end.
I think that's a really good cliffhanger.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless there are any other questions from the audience.
The one over there.
Oh, the bottle?
The wobo.
It's just a joke.
No, so that came from. So it's a Danish. There's a Danish bricklayer tradition, and it's kind of a revolt. It's called the Dead Bricklayer, and it goes back. There are examples of it that 500 years ago in Elsinore, where Hamlet's castle is. Not in his castle, but in a church. There's a beer bottle sticking out. And it was something that the workers did if the developer mistreated them, and they would leave a bottle in somewhere kind of hidden, more hidden than this. And then when the wind hits in the right direction, it would make the house howl, and so the developer, the owner, would think the house was haunted and freak them out. So it was just being mean. Yeah. So it's kind of a revolt against the rich. Or the church.
Exhibition makers do it all the time. I'm sure some of the people who installed this show put their names behind some brick somewhere. You'll find it when you take it down.
And the fish head, yeah.
Thank you very much for the lively conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rutger. See you again in 20 years? No, sooner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think the bar is open.